you so much for coming to Thayer Memorial Library. I'm Karen Silverthorne, and this is a very special day for us. As you all know by now, April is Lancaster History Month here at Thayer Memorial Library. And so tonight, we are glad you're able to join us for the final of our 5 episodes in our history series. And it's been such a success that we've already started talking about doing this again next year, making it the 2nd annual History Month. Hopefully, we haven't decided for sure what month yet, but we want to do it again. The Lancaster Cultural Council is a local agency which is supported by the Massachusetts Cultural Council, a state agency. The Massachusetts Cultural Council distributes funds to local and regional cultural councils who then re-grant funds to arts, humanities, and interpretive science projects in their own communities. Local cultural councils provide grants and programming to support culture in every Massachusetts city and town. This evening's program is paid for by a grant from Lancaster's Cultural Council, and we are very grateful for this gift to our community. And because of this, we are able to bring you the program tonight. This evening, we are joined by Brenda Sullivan of the Gravestone Girls. Their mission is to keep our dead alive. They create decorative artwork using the beautiful and primitive images carved on old New England gravestones, give lectures on cemetery art, history, and symbolism, as well as teach gravestone rubbing classes. Their work aims to entertain and educate on the historical perspective of old cemeteries by documenting and preserving the beautiful art they contain. So now, without further delay, please join me in welcoming Brenda Sullivan of the Gravestone Girls.
So, by the turnout here, that tells me you all are interested in the cemeteries, yeah? Yes. So, how many go to the cemeteries in town? How many of you have been to the cemeteries in town? All right, I need to see more hands than that, so there'll be a field trip afterwards. So, bring your raincoat. What I'm going to do tonight is give you a virtual tour of the cemeteries in Lancaster. And let's get going, shall we? So welcome to the graveyard. This is your tour of cemetery art and history and symbolism with the Gravestone Girls. And as Karen mentioned, this program's made possible by a cultural grant from the Lancaster Cultural Council. It would not be possible to do many of the things that I do with the local libraries and other institutions without funding from this group. So we thank them very much. So Gravestone Girls, indeed, our mission is to keep our dead alive by preserving cemetery art and history. Shameless self-promotion, gravestonegirls.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram as well. We are always out and about. Like I said, I went to New Orleans, and I put up a few pictures while I was stranded in New York the other night. But I've got about 400 pictures that I'll be sharing with you through Facebook. And Instagram. So there is indeed an S on the end of this. Gravestone Girls, there is more than one. There are 2 other ladies that help make this possible. This is my webmistress, Melissa. If you follow us on Facebook, you would know her as webmistress Zipporah. She keeps us looking good on the internet. She is our social media evangelist, and I could not possibly do that portion of the business without her. This unconventional conventionalist down here is Maggie. She's my best friend since the age of way long ago. And yeah, I'm getting to that point. I'm not saying that number anymore. So she and I grew up in Southborough, so not far from here. Melissa grew up out in Munson. Maggie and I spent many of our days as youths growing up riding our bicycles through the cemeteries of not only around Southborough, but Marlborough and other towns as well, when it was safe to ride around on the streets. So she is one of the people that helped get the Gravestone Girls really off the ground. What the Gravestone Girls is truly a hobby that ran amok. So we do a bunch of different things. We give presentations like this. We want to teach you, show you what's in your backyards and on your main streets in your own town. We want to tell you what it means, why it looks like it does. You have very important cultural artifacts right here in your town. It's important you know about it. It's important you visit them, and it's important that you help support them to keep them safe and to keep them available for other generations. We lead cemetery tours. We teach gravestone rubbing classes too. I want to speak about this for just a second. There's a lot of misconception. Gravestone rubbing is bad, it's dangerous, illegal, it shouldn't be done, and none of that is true. The key there is that it must be a properly executed gravestone rubbing. So you need to get a little bit of education before you go out. Take a class with the Gravestone Girls. Do some reading through the Association for Gravestone Studies. You can purchase a kit through our friends up in York, Maine called Gravestone Artware that's got instructions and materials. To do a gravestone rubbing is a completely inert, uninvasive process if it's done properly. You have to remember that these objects have been outside 24/7 for literally hundreds of years. So choosing the right stone is important, using the right materials is important, getting permission from whoever oversees the burial ground is important. You don't need a PhD in geology or anything like that, but you do need to know what you're doing before you head out. Because if you don't and you cause damage, it's irreparable. So it's people going out in the past and doing it the wrong way is what's caused the overseers of a lot of these spaces to say, no, we prohibit this, you can't do this anymore. But there is no law on the books in Massachusetts that prohibits gravestone rubbing. It's not a statewide law. It's up to whoever oversees the burial ground to determine what they will and will not allow. So if you do a documentation of a gravestone by doing a gravestone rubbing, in the future, that might be the only thing that's left. Or at the very least, it's a snapshot of what that stone looks like at a particular point in time, because they do change. You know, Karen was mentioning about how the tree limbs break and come crashing down and break the stones. They heave and hoe from the freeze and thaw cycles of our New England seasons. Biological growth grows on the face of them and obscures them, makes them difficult to read. Unfortunately, there's vandalism. There's things that happen in these spaces all the time. So a properly executed gravestone rubbing serves to document that stone at a particular point in time for posterity, for the future. So like I said, I grew up in Southborough. My mother's people are from Bolton. So we went to the Old South Cemetery on a very regular basis to take care of the ancestral stones. And that's where my mother taught me how to rub gravestones when I was very little. And she did it exclusively for the purpose of keeping me out of her hair and occupied while she and my grandmother were taking care of the family lot. So years go by. I've got all of these gravestone rubbings. And what I tell everybody is that I'm just greedy and selfish. I had a few gravestone friends. I had a few stones that I was really a fan of that I wanted to take home. I wanted something three-dimensional. I wanted something tangible. And I was smart enough to know that it would be frowned upon to remove them from the cemetery. So I used my art education. I have an art history education and a background in small antique restoration. So I took what I knew. We'll get a whole pile of them since there's so many of you in the room. To do that next thing on the list, gravestone replicas. That's something Gravestone Girls do. I'm going to pass them around. These are not samples. They're not souvenirs. I want them back. Pass them around, share them with your neighbors, take an opportunity to read them. These are actually made from the faces of original colonial New England gravestones. So these are from my magnet collection. It's shameless self-promotion. They are available for sale this evening, but that is not truly the reason why I brought them. I brought them to show you the other thing that Gravestone Girls do and how we got to where we are today. So I have an art history and restoration education. Took what I knew, used the trade to develop a process that I could safely take into the cemetery to collect my images and then bring them home and replicate them. And that's where Maggie came in. We did a lot of work together to make a few of our favorites. And look, we've got our own gravestones now. We've got our copies of history. This is fabulous. And the joke very quickly became, nothing says Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday like a gravestone. It's really true for the hard to shop for on your list. So we started giving them as gifts. And people said, well, that's cool. Can you make one for me to give to somebody in my life? Yes, absolutely, we can do that. We start doing arts and craft shows and that kind of stuff, and selling in different places, small time. And Melissa comes along and builds the website, and presto, Gravestone Girls available worldwide on the internet. I get an email one day, and it's got this picture attached to it. And the gentleman is in Ohio, and he says, this is the gravestone of my 7th great-grandfather. He was a colonel in the Revolutionary War. This is my family's coat of arms. And I was just, I'm my family's history keeper, and I was just trolling the internet looking for a way to replicate this gravestone. And I found the Gravestone Girls. So ladies, since you're in Massachusetts, and since you already know how to do this process safely, might I hire you to replicate this ancestral gravestone for me? I am a good capitalist and entrepreneur, and I leaped at the occasion and said, well, of course we'll help you. And we did. We got permission from the town. This is in Concord, that fabulous graveyard up on Burial Hill. We got permission from them to work, and this is Maggie taking that impression. That's what we actually do. We lay our material on the face of the stone to collect the image and bring it home, and then we replicate it from there. So I will teach you how to rub gravestones all day long. I will not teach you how to do this. Don't ask me. I don't need the competition. And also, truly, you know that phrase, I am a professional, don't try this at home? It's really true. Imagine working with a material and putting it on the face of the stone and maybe it doesn't come off. And even if it does, which if you're lucky it does, but whatever you add to the face of a gravestone, you're going to leave something behind. Even if you think you've washed it off, even if you think you've taken care of it, unless you know what you're doing and what's in your materials, you're leaving something behind that could be detrimental to the stone. So leave the gravestone casting to us, but please feel free to rub all the gravestones you want once you follow the right protocols. So that's enough fabulousness about the Gravestone Girls. We're here to talk about Lancaster cemeteries in particular. So Lancaster established in 1653. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cemeteries listed in your historic register. I want to make note of a couple of things. The Shaker Cemetery was, at the time, belonged to the Shakers in Shirley, but was over in the Lancaster line. All the stones were taken up in 1927 at the direction of the Shaker community, and there is now one monument there for them. And also down here, you've got an interesting thing going on with St. John's. St. John's established in 1847. In 1901, the stones from the St. John's in Clinton were moved here to St. John's in Lancaster. So before we delve into the world of gravestones and cemeteries, we have to answer 2 basic questions about the origin and the evolution of the cemetery. We want to answer the question, why do we bury the dead, and where do gravestones come from? As humans, we're mortal, so we have a certain amount of time, we have a certain amount of life. And there's going to be a time when this mortal coil fails, and you've got to do something with the body. So we dig a hole, we dig a grave, we put the body into the grave. And we take that grave, and initially, we put multiple stones across the top of it. So it served and it's actually where the term gravestone comes from, but it served a couple of really good purposes. One, it marked the spot where you buried someone should you want to come back and memorialize, remember, visit. It also served the purpose of, you know where you put someone when it's time to put someone else in. You're not disturbing the interments that are already there. And the third thing was a very practical reason early on, is that it kept wild animals from disturbing the freshly turned earth. So we cover up that fresh earth with piles of stones. The archaeological record from over 50,000 years ago shows that many civilizations believed that there was a world after this. We went somewhere after this. And we know that because in these archaeological finds, we find things like this. This is a very simple grave But we find grave goods. It can be very simple, it can be very elaborate. But we're going to find things in the graves that might be needed for the next world. They might be wearing clothing, they might be wearing jewelry. They might have, in these pots, you might have food offerings, you might have sacred oils, you might have something that that particular community felt was necessary for the deceased to have access to in the next world. Aren't these big pointy things really just fabulous gravestones? Right? Aren't they really just big gravestones? They mark the spot where Pharaoh is buried, and they contain wonderful things. They contain everything that Pharaoh needs for the next world. Now, while I could talk about 50,000 years worth of history, no problem. We don't have that kind of time. So I'm going to get you right to the good stuff. We're going to take an evolutionary tour of gravestones and cemeteries through the three major eras that we find here in New England. So the first one is the colonial period from first settlement through the 1700s. We have the rural garden movement of the 19th century. And then we're going to take a peek into the modern cemeteries of the 20th and the 21st century. So the best part of my job is getting ready for these programs, because it means I came to town and I went into all of your cemeteries and I took pictures and I built my program around those pictures. I want to use as much local content as possible. I want you guys to look at the screen and see something from Settlers Burial Ground or from St. John and say, hey, I know where that is. Hey, that's interesting. I want to go back in and take a look, take another look. And I will tell you that for a lot of the towns that I do this for, sometimes when I come to town to do this research, it's the first time I'm going to town and going in your cemeteries, in their cemeteries. Here in Lancaster, I've been sitting down getting ready for this program. I went back through my archives of photos that date back to 2005, and I combed through over 500 photographs to make this program tonight. So have no doubt that I could indeed talk about this until tomorrow. You've got so much good stuff. It was very hard to cull out and still give you a lot. Know that what I'm showing you is a really good representation, but there's so much more out there for you to go and explore. So every time I put a slide up on the screen, a couple of things are going to happen. You're going to have a picture, but down somewhere on the frame, you'll have a caption. And the first line will say what we're looking at, and the second line will say where it is. So if it's from town, it's going to say the name of the cemetery. If it's from outside of Lancaster, it will say Boston, Mass, or Gloucester, Mass, or wherever. But I tried to identify what was local to you, so maybe it sparks something and gets you interested in going out there. So originally, from first settlement forward into the last quarter of the 1600s, when we're burying people, there's not a lot of pomp and circumstance. There's almost no ceremony. It's a very practical thing. We're going to the gravesite, we're putting the body in, and we're basically leaving. If it's marked with a stone or a pile of stones, but if it's marked with a stone of identity, it might just be a very simple rough stone. May or may not have anything written on it. Wooden markers were also used early on, if they were used at all. Those will have deteriorated over time and disappeared off the landscape. But they're going to be rough-hewn stones like these guys, and they might say something. They might have a name, they might have a date. They're going to be very minimal in information. That being said, you guys have a little bit of extra going on here with your early gravestones, and we're going to get closer to them in a moment. So these are rough stones being used as gravestones, and this is over in the Settlers Burial Ground. The colonial landscape. When you walk into any colonial period cemetery, burial ground, don't let me be lazy with my language. These are not cemeteries yet. These are burial grounds, they're graveyards, they're burying places, they're burial points. They're not even churchyards. So this is early on. This landscape comes in around the last quarter of the 1600s. And when you look at this space, when you look at any colonial period landscape of a graveyard, know what you see today is absolutely different, has changed over time from when it was first put in. And I know that sounds crazy because of the way we currently think about historic preservation, but these spaces do change over time for any number of reasons. Your settler's burial ground is really kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? So with this colonial space, with this settler's burial ground, this is your oldest burial ground. Y'all know where this is, right? Basically over hill, over dale, past the railroad tracks, through the pine grove, poof, a burial ground in the middle of nowhere. Well, it wasn't originally the middle of nowhere. Your first meeting house was located nearby. And in these in these old colonial towns, they're putting the burial grounds in, they're putting the meeting houses up in very close time to each other. So the meeting houses are being used for religious services, they're being used for town meetings and town business, they're being used for social and other types of gatherings. They're not building churches yet. When the meeting house in the center of town got moved, this now ends up in what's considered to be the middle of nowhere. So one of the keys that you can tell an old burial ground has been reorganized, one, where is it in perspective, in proximity to its original meeting house, and also nice straight lines. They're all facing the same way, which they're supposed to, but nice straight lines. So the thing that happens over time is as town grows, these spaces give up their land. So in this case, this got left all by itself. Now we go over to the old common, that's your second oldest one. And when that road gets put in and gets widened, it's going to be something that encroaches on the burial ground. People come in later on, and for aesthetic reasons, they reorganize. For groundskeeping reasons, they reorganize. The idea of putting things back into its current position or its original position is really something that we've kind of only come up with since maybe the 1960s, maybe as far back as the 60s, when the first real preservation movement started. But know that when you look at these spaces, they absolutely have changed over time. And those nice, neat rows will show you that they've been reorganized. Gravestones have parts. They've got a shoulder here. This is the tympanum, where the art is contained, and another shoulder here. 3 lobes, tripartite, just a fancy way of saying that they've got 3 parts up on the top. You've got a biographical space in here on this tablet. We're going to talk about who it was. We've got some information about death date and age and very, very simple information. Later on, we get, this is actually added afterwards. That's funny, I hadn't noticed that before. It's my guess anyway. You get this thing down here called an epitaph. 2 lines, 4 lines, maybe longer, maybe shorter, but it's going to be something that speaks to the reader, the living person standing here looking at this gravestone. It's going to speak to the reader about mortality and morality. It's going to be something that should be very easily recognizable, if you can read, for the time. It's going to be something from a biblical passage. It might be part of a hymn. It might be part of current literature of the time. It would be something very obviously easily recognized and obviously understood. There are no never say nevers in anything in the world, and certainly not in gravestone studies, but it is not, an epitaph in this colonial period is not, I wrote my husband's epitaph. It's not that personal of a level. It's much more a universal level about mortality and morality and reminding the reader about their mortality. Gravestones came in 2 parts originally too. Originally, we've got headstones and footstones. So the headstone marks the beginning, or the head of the grave, and the footstone marks the foot or the end of the grave. And then the body is buried in between. So if you bury father, and he's 6 feet tall, there's a 6-foot spread between his headstone and footstone. If you bury mother and she's 5 feet tall, there's a 5-foot spread between her headstone and footstone. So if you follow that logic, when you look at this picture, they were all the same height, right? This is another great visual cue to tell you that this space has been reorganized. Isn't this just about the right size for the mower to go through? You think I'm kidding. You want to mow around something that's here and here and here and here and here and here and here? Nope. We've got a schedule to maintain. We got dollars to pay. We need to be efficient about our groundskeeping. So at some point, that footstone gets moved out and it becomes its own row. And people will often look at it and think, oh, because those stones are small, they must be for children. Well, good guess, but probably not. And the way you can tell is this footstone, if this is my headstone, and it reads my name, Brenda J. Sullivan, the footstone is going to bear my name or bear my initials, something that will tie the big one and the little one together. And that way you'll know that they go together, and you'll know by seeing where they are in relation to each other that they have indeed been moved. And here, we're lucky. We're very lucky. So at least they're still here, so they got moved, so what? Sometimes they get made into their own row, sometimes they get put up behind their parent stone, and if we're not so lucky, they disappear. They get tossed over the wall and into the woods outside of the burial ground property. They get used to build the stone walls. They get used in people's patios and foundations. They show up in all kinds of places. They're used to prop up other gravestones. They end up in crazy places. And it has a lot to do with two things. One, we're good Yankees. We reuse, we don't waste. And also, the idea that the historic preservation and keeping objects together and keeping the original landscape, again, like I said, is a relatively new phenomenon. You know, when the Victorians came through in the 19th century, they wanted to clean these places up too. They were like, look at this mess, we need to straighten it out. So that's how these things move around. There's a concept associated with this called east-west axis orientation. And it's a really fancy way to just say two things, really. How, where the bodies are buried and why they're buried that way. So remember, last quarter of the 1600s, moving into the 1700s, these spaces look like this. They're a very religious group. They're taking the Bible very literally. So what they've done, even their gravestones and their burial grounds are oriented a particular way in keeping with their religious belief system. So what we're looking at here, these are all the backs of the stones. The writing is on the other side. The head of the body is buried here. And what this east-west axis orientation means is the writing faces west. The body is here behind the headstone because on Judgment Day, the Archangel Gabriel is going to come from the east over here. You can tell by the sun in my pictures. The Archangel Gabriel is going to come from the east. He's going to blow his trumpet, sounding the call to resurrection and Judgment Day, and all the dead are going to sit up in their graves facing east to meet their Maker. This is a really important call. You don't want to miss this call. They really believed that you needed to be prepared and be ready because you wanted to get out of here. When the call came, you want to get on to the next world. And if you sat up and you were facing the wrong way, you might miss the call. You might get left behind. And that was not part of the plan. Yeah, I told you your headstones and footstones were special. So this is over in Settlers, and you'll see a lot of these. And there's actually even a couple of them over at the old common burial ground too. So what I've got here is a headstone, and there's its footstone. And when you read them, here lieth the body of Dorothy, the daughter of John Prescott, blah, 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 Prescott, blah, 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 blah. Can't read all, oh, yeah, and Dorothy, his wife, who, next page, please, we move to the other stone. I don't see this very often, and you've got a ton of them. Next, the footstone then picks up the thought. Deceased, the 27th day of March, 1718, aged 7 years. So you've got a lot going on here. You've got headstones and footstones. One carries the part of the message, the footstone carries the second part of the message. And the thing that makes these so hard to read is that we just ran to the end. And when I was in the middle of a word, I just wrapped the next, like down here. Dorothy, his, W-I-F-E. So we just keep wrapping it. If you look at ancient Roman manuscripts, you will find that that's how they wrote. They ran the text all the way from edge to edge, and they just kept going. I think there's some inspiration going on there. The other thing that makes it challenging over in the settlers' burial ground is that it's in a pine grove. So they're hard to see. So you have to time it, go the right time of day and get some good sunlight if you can. But if you can't revolve your life schedule around where the sun is positioned in the sky over the cemetery, you can, I do that, but when I can't. You'll notice these are nice and bright, right? We used a mirror. So you go into the burial ground, and it's a tall, thin mirror, like you use on the back of your dressing room doors when you're putting your fancy clothes on. And if this is the face of the stone, I stood over here, depending on where the sun was, but I stood at an angle with my mirror to catch the light of the sun, to shine it on the face of the stone, to light them, to make them good for taking their picture, as well as making them easier to read. Clever, huh? I've been doing this for a while. Easy peasy. I get asked by people, there are skulls on these gravestones. What is going on with these people? What was wrong with them? They put skulls on their gravestones. Remember, very religious, very superstitious, following the Bible to the letter in a very orthodox fashion. You've got that ideology, but you've also got a large portion of the population that maybe they can't read and write. So this is a picture language that speaks to them about mortality and morality. The belief system said you have one immortal soul. Your job is to keep that soul as free and clean of sin as possible, because when you die and Judgment Day comes, your behavior here is what you're going to be judged on to determine whether you go to heaven or whether you make a trip downstairs. So they do this in a very obvious fashion. This is a scare tactic. This is absolutely a scared straight program. So the idea, the flesh fails, the soul set free from its earthly prison to take its flight to the next world. So it's the skull here is what remains of being mortal at the time, because that they're following the Bible so closely to the letter. The idea of representing being human with something that looked human, or using something that looked angelic, like a heavenly host, would have been considered a graven image and would have been sacrilegious. And I'm pretty sure sacrilege counts against you when you're being judged to get into the next world. So that's the reason behind it. They lived in a society that every little transgression might be the difference between heaven and hell, salvation and eternal damnation. So you were to remember that every moment of the day, and you were to correct your behavior, be mindful of it as every second of every day. Now, whether they followed all this stuff or not, practice versus theory, but that's the theory behind it. So they all look different, but they all mean the same thing. You actually had a number of important carvers coming from this area as well. That's a whole nother lecture. There's a phrase we see a lot in Latin on these old gravestones, memento mori. Remember your mortality. Remember you're going to die. All very uplifting, I know. But they were realists. They understood that death was omnipresent. They lived with it every moment of every day. They lost people on a very regular basis. So they knew that you could be here 1 minute and gone the next. So the work you did here was what you were going to be judged on. You were to make the most of every minute you had. So we put Latin on the stones. because we want to make sure we get the educated. We want to make sure we get the people that can just read and write, not necessarily Latin. And we want to get the people that can't read and write with the imagery. So there's a Latin phrase up here that says, "Ficus te gravi finitur." Translates to, "I am done. A grave fear comes to an end." Well, that's lovely, but you don't need to know how to read Latin to understand the message on this 18th century gravestone. This is down in Hartford, Connecticut. Here's a tree. A tree is symbolic of somebody living, right? A tree has a beginning and an end. It's a fragile life. It could be interrupted at any point in time. You are the tree. You're having a day. But you don't know it yet. This is your maker. Comes out of the clouds with his hatchet and he fells your tree. Hope you're ready. Not taking this one back. This one's for keeps. The idea that it could happen at any moment, and the idea of being prepared. That translation, "I am done," well, yeah, if you're the tree, you're done. But a grave fear comes to an end. No longer, no longer do I have to worry that if I thought, geez, I didn't like my wife's hair this morning, that might be the difference between sending you to heaven and hell. I didn't like the coffee. Oh, that was bad. That's going to send me out. Little transgressions are just as bad as big transgressions. It's all the same. It all counted against you. So if you worked every day to try to be mindful of that behavior and try to do good and virtuous work, you hope to be rewarded for it. So if you spent all that time worrying about it, well, now it's over. I did what I can, and I hope that it's enough. Lightly inscribed across the top of this stone, located over in Oxford, says, "The grave is God's hiding place. Don't worry, death is not a permanent condition. We're going to hang out here for a while, but we're not going to stay in the grave forever, because we're waiting for something. We're waiting for something very important. We're waiting for this. Resurrection, the call of the trumpet of Gabriel coming in from the east, signaling Judgment Day for resurrection, redemption of your sins, and ascension to heaven. This is where all the hard stuff happened. This is where all the pain and suffering happened. This is where you spent every day just trying to survive. So how you held up under that was what you were judged upon to determine which way you went. I use this one a lot lately. This is from Concord as well. Like my original casting that sent me on this whole process. Look at that handsome guy. Good looking guy, yeah? So that's death. That's mortality. And what it says up here is all must submit to the king of terrors. Death was known as the king of all terrors, and all must submit. It's that idea nobody gets out of here alive. You're all going to go. So don't worry. The passage that follows says, through Christ, we conquer, rise, and reign forever. We will be redeemed, we will be saved, and it's all good. We're going to the big party in the sky. There are other symbols on these old colonial stones as well. These are all from the common and settlers' burial grounds, and they are spectacular. See this guy? He's dead. His glass ran out. In case you didn't know how to read, there you go. You're all going. The idea everybody was born with an hourglass. You had just so much sand. You didn't know how much sand you had. And that glass could run out at any time. So it was the idea of always being prepared. I've got another hourglass here. I've got a star here and a star here. Stars are guiding lights. They rise in the east in the evening, and they set in the west at dawn. So the beginning, the end, and there you are in the middle. You've got a certain amount of time, but you're going out whether you like it or not. Happy lot, weren't they? They were complete realists. I got crossbones here. What do I have? Do I have a pirate here? You got pirates in Lancaster? Wouldn't that be fabulous? Maybe you do. Who uses crossbones? Pirates. We use it on poison. It's a warning, right? It's a visual cue about danger. They happen to be the long bones, just in case you needed to know that. In case there's a trivia quiz some night. The idea, again, just another symbol about mortality. I've got a great winged skull here. I've got an hourglass here. I've got 2 toe pincher coffins here. Warning, danger, death ahead, mortality. Oh my God, get ready, get ready. And that's what it is. It's this constant nagging, puritanical finger wagging about your mortality and your morality and how it affects you in the next world. As we come into the early 1700s, around the 1720s, there's a great awakening that makes its way over here from England. And we've been here about 100 years. We've got multiple natural-born generations. They're the modern people of the time. And they kind of look back at their ancestors and they're like, whew, they're a pretty serious lot. We, as the modern people of the time, yes, we're still religious. Yes, we're still superstitious, but not quite so. Not quite so much. We don't have to follow the letter of the Bible verbatim because it's interpretive. And we, as long as we do good work, our Maker will understand our position and judge us fairly. We still have that immortal soul that we need to take care of and make sure it gets off to the next world as free and clean of sin as possible. But we'll do it with a new symbol for that time period. So that skull is allowed to grow some skin, and it can now look human or look angelic without running the risk of being a graven image. It's the modern symbol for mortality and morality of the early 18th century. It's absolutely easily understood. It means exactly the same thing as the winged skull that we saw before, that death's head. But this winged soul now is the modern symbol for the time. And again, they'll look different based on who carved them, but they all mean the same thing, and they would be very easily understood. Other souls, just because your soul doesn't have wings doesn't mean that you don't have one. What's this guy doing? He's peeking out of the coffin at you. Like that other guy we saw next to the hourglass. You're all going to die. You're all going to get a coffin. You're all going to get put in the ground. You're all going to go. Just another warning. This is a local carver as well. He's pulling back on imagery from the Roman times. The family name is Worcester or Worcester. And it's said that he adopted this style because he saw it on ancient Roman sarcophagi and wall imagery and said, well, good enough for them, good enough for me. If it was a mortality symbol back then, 2,000 years ago, it's a perfect mortality symbol for the 18th century. Carver identification can be tough. This guy you will always be able to recognize because he carved this way for his whole career. He had a son that followed, and I believe he also carved in the same style for his career as well. Gravestones also weren't typically signed. To put your name to something as a creator was an act of sacrilege. There is one creator, and you ain't it. So any carver identification that's happened, and that's not to say that there are none, because they are just very few and far between. Carver identification is typically done by searching through the probate records and finding payment to someone for a gravestone and then saying, okay, payment to this for this guy's gravestone, it looks like this must be the carver, and building on it from there. It's like doing genealogy work. No trip to Lancaster for me is complete without a visit to these two guys. I love this. I'm the only one that loves these two, but I love them. They're over in Old Settlers. I know they look like aliens. I know he looks like an alien too. But also done by another family of carvers. Their name was Park. and they come from over in the Groton area, and you'll find a lot of their stones. This is probably a park as well. When you read a gravestone that says, as in this case, somebody aged 71 years, 2 months, and 28 days. If I get up every day and I make the effort to try and mind my P's and Q's and be a good and virtuous member of the community, I want credit for every day that I made the effort. I didn't make it a whole year, but I made it another 28 days. And you'll see a lot of that, not just the years that somebody lived, but the years, the months, and right down to the day. As we get to the close of the 1700s, we've got a big doings going on, right? We've got a revolution. We tell the king across the pond, thanks, it's been great, but we're going to strike out on our own. And when we do, and we become successful and we win, we're a new modern society. We're another type of society. And the founding fathers are looking for ideology and foundation of ideals for this new nation. So they look to the Greeks and the Romans, because they were the founders of the ideas of democracy and the republic, the idea of governing oneself. So they adopt that ideology. And it becomes what we call neoclassicism. So there's that ideology that's happening, but also at the same time, there's real-time archaeology going on. People are making the grand tours to Europe. They are excavating Pompeii and Herculaneum. The far reaches of the Roman outposts across Europe are being excavated. And all these objects are coming to light about these ancient civilizations. So what happens in the land of the living happens in the land of the dead. In the land of the living, this neoclassicism completely infiltrates. So it affects the architecture, it affects their dress, it affects their furniture, and it affects their gravestones. So now this modern society says, we don't need these flying heads and these flying skulls. We're good with that. That's not who we are. We are more modern. We understand about death and mortality, and we approach it in a different way. We look at it in a softer light. We look at it as a different process. And we still understand that there's someplace to go after this. So with those archaeological finds, one of the things that's coming out of the ground is the cinerary urn, the vessel that carries the body. So it becomes adopted into the faces of the gravestones as a modern symbol for mortality. We get trees again, like the tree we saw before, but this is a weeping willow. So by virtue of its name, by virtue of the way it looks, it's a perfect symbol for mourning and sorrow. And when the tree gets split, like we saw, the tree that was split on the other stone, it's the idea of that interruption of life. Trees, like human lives, have a definite beginning, a definite end. They're fragile, and they can be interrupted at any time. But look what's happening here. There's a new life springing from that, the promise that there's something else after this. So we get these two symbols by themselves very regularly, and they combine, and we see them as the very common symbol throughout the 1800s on the faces of gravestones. So we've got the urn here, and then we've got that weeping willow here. Something living, something dead, the idea of mortality, a beginning and an end. This is a gateway. There's a lot of symbology still on the faces of these 19th century stones. So there's your urn and willow. There's your living and dead thing going on, your mortality. This is terra firma. The rest of this is all metaphor, the allegory. The idea, see the posts? These are lovely because they're done half side like you're already walking through. Love it. Those are neoclassical style posts, right? You've got the little capitals on them. They've got the little balls on the top. It's the gate that you walk through to enter the graveyard. Still called graveyards. You pass through here to get into the graveyard. This is the tomb, the passage to the grave, and also the portal to the next world, the promise of something more beyond this. This looks a lot different, doesn't it? This is Mount Auburn. Anybody been to Mount Auburn? Okay, the rest of you, we will meet here tomorrow for a road trip. Call the boss, tell him I ain't coming to work. So this is Mount Auburn Cemetery. First time this burial space is called a cemetery. We've had an industrial revolution or two as the century wears on. And those modern people of the time have changed. They've moved from being farmers and being an agrarian lifestyle to being city dwellers and to being an industrialized nation. So everything changes in the land of the living. You leave the farm, you come to the city. You've got mechanizations in these factories that are making life easier. You know, you're working in the factories, you're making money. I'm not saying that, 16 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week in the 19th century factories was a cakewalk, but you weren't spending all your time just trying to survive. So they've got some money. The mechanizations from the factories are making life easier. It's easier to obtain goods. Yes, they're still religious to a degree. Yes, they're superstitious. Yes, they're religious. But they're looking at life and death a little bit differently. They still believe there's another world beyond this, but we have a different attitude with it. It's much more pleasant. You pass through the veil, you walk through the door from this world to the next. It has a lot to do with the writing that's going on at the time, the Hawthornes and the Thoreaus, and the rest of them writing about communing with nature, getting back to nature, preserving nature. Because we've become industrialized, but we're also missing this space. This open green space becomes more important to us. And so Mount Auburn was founded by the Massachusetts Horticultural Society in Cambridge in 1831. Again, the first time the space is called cemetery. And the word cemetery comes from a Greek word that means sleeping place or dormitory. So no more hatchets. We fall asleep, we pass away, we go to the summerland, we pass to the spirit world. There's a euphemism that comes along now for this terminology. And everything changes. Green grass, rolling hills, pathways to walk. The monuments are different materials, the different shapes, the different sizes. Everything changes because they look back at their ancestors that had those slate stones. That's what those dark stones were, by the way. They're called slate. Found at a local quarry. They look back at those brutal images and the fire and brimstone of it all, and they say, what a bunch of barbarians. We don't think like this. This is not who we are as modern people. This is who we are as modern people. So this idea of the cemetery comes to light when Massachusetts Horticultural put this original 75 acres together. They did it to be a cemetery, but also to be a test arboretum, the idea of open green space. And when the gates were open to this newfangled cemetery, people flocked here. It was something they'd never seen before. Open green space, 4 miles outside of downtown, dirty, filthy, industrialized Boston. Looks completely different than anything they've seen before. And I want to speak just a minute about these. So these markers become very much the shapes and sizes they are based on current tradition, the Victorian era. But they're also white. They're made out of marble. We can now get marble, we can get stone for gravestones from a farther distance because we've got railroads, we've got waterways, we've got methods for getting the stone out of the ground and transporting it even farther distances. So marble was chosen as the new gravestone material because it's, one, now readily available, but also it's white. It's white, it's bright, it's symbolic of purity and heaven. We got the whole package going on here. You need to spend somewhere, you need to spend eternity somewhere, this is not a bad place to do it. This is the rural landscape over at St. John's. St. John's was 1876, did I say? Something like that. Last quarter, 1870s, 1800s. So this idea of the cemetery takes off, and everybody starts making them. Towns start building these new spaces. There's a call for it. Then you want to be the modern people, right? So I'm sure this is looking lovely now that the trees are all coming in. But look, you've got that very busy landscape. You've got all sorts of different shapes and sizes and colors. This is very much a rural landscape. In these new cemeteries, you can do something you weren't really able to do before. You can buy a family plot. You can buy a section of land. That's your family's plot. That's your family's burial space. Sort of like a vacation home. Home away from home. The idea of, now remember, the Victorians of the 19th century, they've got a lot of romantic ideals. They've got a lot of euphemisms for everything. They've got a lot of pomp and circumstance. They're fancy creatures. And so it would only make sense that I can get a family plot, and as each one passes away, they'll go to this space and we'll all get brought back together again. And the dead were very mobile. Don't let anybody kid you. They're actually still pretty mobile today, but when 19th century families were buying these family plots, they're going into the old spaces and they're taking the ancestors and bringing them to the new homestead. It sounds kind of crazy. Happened a lot, and actually still happens quite a bit today. So the idea of that family plot, it might be very simple. I know that this is my family plot because I got a corner marker, one on each corner. There's two behind. This looks like my house, right? Walk up the front stairs. There is everybody. You know, it's very much that idea, home, away from home kind of ideal. One of the things that changes is we get a central monument now that will be typically in the middle of the plot, and it will have all the information of the people on it. Names, relationships, birth and death dates, ages. We also, not only did we have money to do this, but we had money to do this too. So everybody's got a headstone as well. And those headstones may just say the names, and then you get the rest of the information on the large one. It really was up to how much money you had and how fancy you wanted to be. And they were very fancy when they had the means to do so. So I've got a house. I got a homestead. So does everybody else. Now I've got a neighborhood. The idea of coming and buying a spot, you know, if my neighbors bought a spot, well, you know, that's the new thing to do. I should probably do that too. And if I like my neighbors, I'm going to want to buy something near them. And if I don't like my neighbors, I'm going to buy something on the other side of the cemetery. But these are very social communal spaces. You packed a picnic lunch, you go in, you take care of your plots, you plant flowers, you socialize, you picnic, you catch up with the living and the dead. These are very, very social spaces for their time. Symbols, much softer. No more axes, no more crossbones, no more scary faces. Much, much softer. The axe doesn't fall and chop your life where you are. The angels come and carry you away. It's a much more pleasant transition. Sheath of wheat up here, the idea of the harvest. We've got a lamb here. I know it doesn't look like it, but trust me, we'll talk about those guys in a minute. Lambs, symbol of purity and innocence, very often used for children, young women. This is lovely. This is over in St. John's. Beautiful child in prayer. In very typical 19th century attire as well. On a small child's grave. And then I've got a wreath here. Wreaths were used to decorate. Wreaths were used for remembrance. Wreaths were circles that never ending. Wreaths were also made out of things like laurel. And here with this sword, I know, without even reading, I know I've got somebody military for this time and space, and I've actually got Civil War, 1862. So not only do I have a wreath, but I've got a very particular wreath, the idea of victory. This is a good place to talk about marble. So we picked the marble because it was available, it was white, it was bright, it was beautiful. The one thing that they didn't really recognize, that geologically it's a very different material than the slates we saw in the Old North and the old common burial grounds. Slate is a sedimentary rock that builds up in layers. Those layers get fused together through the pressure of the earth and makes them very strong and yet easy to carve. We've got a lot of slate belts, slate pits around here that made it a local material, so it was very easily attainable for the making of gravestones, among other things, including things like roofs and foundations. With the marble, it's calcium carbonate, so it's made up of a lot of the stuff that your teeth and your bones are made out of. It's very porous, it's got a much looser grain, and it's much more susceptible to weathering. So while these aren't white, they are indeed marble. This guy too. They're very porous, they pick up stuff out of the atmosphere, all sorts of things cause them to discolor. From those pollutants, they get black biological growth on them. And they dissolve, they deteriorate over time. And you can tell, because that actually did used to look like a lamb, but now he looks pretty melty. At one time, there was strands of hair. This kid had a nose and face, and you could see his fingers. You could probably even count or see the decorative lace on the outfit that's being worn. It's unfortunate, but it's true. It happens. There's no way to reverse this. They're out there 24/7. They're getting assaulted all the time. They can indeed be cleaned. There's a special way to do it. Don't take it upon yourself to do it without getting yourself an education first. I'm going to guess that at some point this guy's been cleaned. But just know that when you go in and you see all these yucky looking stones, use your mind's eye to picture them in the 19th century when they were white and bright and new, and what an entire white landscape like that would have looked like. They don't call them marble orchards for nothing. We have, remember what I was saying about all the authors writing about nature? We get nods to nature in the graveyard as well. We get flowers. The idea of the bloom, the flower is like a tree. It's got a definite beginning, a definite end. It's got a bud that grows and blooms, and then the bloom fades. So it's the idea of the passage of life. This guy I know is hard to see because he's dirty, but follow me. So he's down flat on the ground. And what I've got here is a little bud and the stem, 3 leaves, and then more stem. So the flower, the bud of the flower that hasn't opened, the life cut short, the life that never gets fully realized, that never gets to bloom. And it's where we attribute the idea of nipped in the bud. I love these. You've got a bunch of these around town. These are between St. John's and this one's in Eastwood. Trees, tree stones. They're called tree stones and tree stumps. They're made out of marble. And I left the trees in for dramatic effect. They were very much meant to be that nod to nature, to blend into the landscape. I've seen some of them that unless you told me they were there, unless I knew I would be looking for them, they blend in pretty well. They are usually easy to spot because of where they are in the middle of all the other gravestones. There isn't just a tree hanging out, but it is that idea, it's another idea about that nod to nature. If you're looking for me, this is where we're all supposed to aspire to go. So that winged skull, that winged soul, this is exactly the same thing. Exactly. It's just the more modern symbol for the time. Everybody understands this. We're going up. We want to go up. We'll all be reunited again. The idea, separated below, reunited above. The hand that picks the flowers. No more axes coming out of the sky chopping the tree. There's the hand coming out of the clouds to pick the flowers. 2 things. When you see it doing this, that doesn't mean they're going south. It's this idea of picking, or perhaps the tap on the shoulder that says, come along, it's time to go. And we also have a Masonic symbol here. The G for geometry, the square and compass, the tools of the trade. There are a couple of things on the landscape I want to make sure you know about. This is called a box tomb. I didn't find any in town, so I used this picture from Gloucester. This is called a table stone. This is over on the Old Common. And, the vocabulary is really hard here. Box, tomb, table, stone. I know it's hard. Follow along if you can, if it doesn't get too complicated. So we see these periodically on the landscape. They're not unusual. And it's the idea, this goes back to European tradition. So at the time, before we got over here, we're all over Europe, and England, of course, the idea of being buried in the church. So you got buried in the church if you were the ministry, part of the clergy, or if you were a patron. Patrons were buying their way in. All the rest of you riffraff outside. So it's prestigious real estate. It's a big place. It's a big honor to be. It's a special honor to be inside the church. So when we do that, the crypt is under the main vault of the church, and it's under the area where the altar is. So that's what this is meant to represent, the idea of the altar. Don't let anyone tell you there's a body in there. There is not. The body is still in the ground. When I see these on the landscape, they are usually, but not exclusively, members of the clergy or some sort of important town member. And I will know that it's an important town member because it will bear the name that I probably see, a surname that I probably will see while I'm out around town looking for the cemeteries and looking at your gravestones. So it might be somebody that the library is named after, that a street is named after, other municipal buildings or other kinds of parks and streets and that thing. So it's not, at this point, it's not that they're patting themselves on the back and saying, look how great I was. It is the idea of they're the leaders of the community. If there's anybody that's supposed to get you to heaven, it's a member of the clergy. So he's this conduit between this world and the next. He's going to help guide you. He's going to give you instruction. He's going to be the interpreter of what your maker wants for you to get to the next world. Same thing with the idea of the founding fathers or other important members of the community. They were meant to set an example for the rest of us. This is not to say I was the bee's knees. It's to say I've set an example that we should all try to aspire to. This is over at Old Common. This is called a hill tomb, more difficult vocabulary. It's a tomb built into a hill. So under this sod and behind this facade, you've got brick vaults. So open the doors. You can't open these, they've all been sealed, but you would open the door and you'd bring the casket inside this structure. It would be a room like this, and you leave the caskets there in the chamber. You don't bury them in the ground. You'll stack them on the ground. You might stack them on each other. They might be on rails, shelving, so that they're up off the ground, but they are enclosed in that room. They are not buried in the ground. And some people's vacation homes are just nicer than other people's vacation homes. That's all there is to that. This is a mausoleum. Again, I didn't find any here in town, so I used this one. I did some work with Norton a while ago, Norwood. I made that mistake before too. So this is a mausoleum. It is an above ground structure. The bodies are in here, in their caskets. This is not a bad place to spend eternity, right? Nicely landscaped. Neighbors are quiet. Private. It's got that neoclassical architecture going on with the pediment and the capitals and columns. So you walked up the front walk, up the front stairs. The family held the key to those beautiful bronze doors. You put the key in, you open the door, and you went inside. And inside, you'll find two things, possibly kneelers or a table and chairs or something to sit, or someplace where you might put flowers. You're going to come in and do that memento mori thing. You're going to think about the people that have gone before. You're going to think about your own mortality. You probably, if you're 19th century Victorian, you're going to catch the deceased up on all the local gossip. So you might find those kind of objects for doing that memento mori thing. You know, get comfortable, sit, eat your lunch. But you're definitely going to find structures inside to hold those caskets. So here, I would come in, open the doors. There's a set of chambers here and here. Niches, they look like lateral files. They're horizontal, and they've got openings that you put the casket inside. You cover with wood or another covering, and then you cover it with the pretty finished stone to make it all look nice. This one has 3 chambers on this side, 3 chambers on this side, so it sleeps 6. Remember, falling asleep, passing away. And also, you'll see them here. This one had them both on this, one on this side, one on the other, and one on the back. They often have windows on them. Beautiful stained glass windows. Those stained glass windows might have a nature scene on it, so it looks like you're looking out the window into nature. It might have a religious theme to it, but it's meant to let light in to this chamber and to make it just like home. And if you have a home away from home, you have a second home, don't you need to buy new furniture for it? You need a road trip, I suggest this. Hope Cemetery in Barre, Vermont. It's a few miles down the road from the Rock of Ages quarry. It's a quarry that's been in existence for more than 110 years under a number of different names. And the quarry makes this beautiful blue-gray granite. And the majority of the monuments in Hope Cemetery are made from this granite. And it's very ethereal. It's got a lot of mica in it. Mica is a reflective mineral, silvery, like the silvering on a mirror. And the pale blue-gray combined with the silver all over the landscape, the whole place just kind of shimmers. It's really lovely. It's a beautiful trip. And by no means are these two objects anomalies on the landscape. In addition to these, there's a cat, a soccer ball, an airplane. There's a really great deathbed scene.
A race car? Yeah, race car.
There's a race car. Good, we've got fans. Excellent. There's Art Nouveau statuary, this abstract statuary of this very well-dressed late 19th century gentleman with a big mustache, and he's got his foot up, and he's smoking a pipe, and out of the pipe smoke comes this beautiful Art Nouveau woman with long, beautiful hair. The men carving the statues, the stone cutters carving these monuments at the Rock of Ages quarry were very talented and very competitive. That's why you have this going on in this land, so much of this going on in this landscape. So I guess the moral of the story here is if you're going to spend eternity in bed, you will do so properly. 2 beds. You will hold hands, you love birds. And you will wear your pajamas. It sounds really exciting, doesn't it? Perhaps I might prefer to go south. No. The empty chair. Come, sit, visit with me. I've only just stepped away, just passed to the other room. I'll be back. We'll be reunited. It's that promise of gone but not forgotten. You know, the family chain that's broken that will be reunited in the next world. I've spent all this time saying this means this and this means that, and this is how you're supposed to read this, and I didn't lie to you. It's all very true. But remember, there's going to be a personal aspect here that we just don't know. Monuments made by people, for people. Some people choose to have their own monuments made before they die. They get to have the last word. So in addition to all that existential thought, you also have to just consider the idea that maybe this was his favorite chair. This looks really different, doesn't it? So this is a modern cemetery. This is St. John's landscape. As we come to the close of the 1800s, there's an arts and crafts movement in England that makes its way over here. There's a backlash against the high ornamentation and the severe emotion and the heavy romanticism, the feverish pitch of emotion that was the Victorian period. And we just want to step back. We want to relax. We want to simplify. So everything gets stripped down. In the land of the living, the furniture changes, the artwork changes, the clothing changes, women are cutting their hair, the bustles and the corsets and all that kind of stuff go by the wayside. And dressing is simpler. Furniture has got the arts and crafts and influence, as does the architecture, and so do these spaces. So we have the ability now to quarry granite on a regular basis. We've got pneumatic tools, both steam and water powered, that gets this very hard rock out of the ground, because granite comes right up from the center of the earth, molten created stone. We want these spaces to be more pastoral. We want them to be easier on the eyes instead of those heavy Victorian busy landscapes. And we've got a lot of rules that go on around here now. We've got modern groundskeeping to think about. We've got a completely different view of this space. We also have a completely different view of our own mortality and death. As we move into the 1900s, medicine has changed. It's moved from being art to being science. We understand how we get sick. We know what germs are. We now have ways to combat those germs and viruses. We understand about cleanliness. We understand about washing our hands so that we don't pass disease. And we like our surgeons and our doctors to do that because they weren't doing that before. We learn about how to preserve our food so that it doesn't spoil and make us sick. And even if we do eat something that's bad, we know what to do. You stay hydrated, you wait for the nastiness to pass, you'll be fine. Prior to that, they thought that you got sick because you did something bad. They thought epidemics happened because we were bad people and God was angry with us. But now we got medicine. We've got science. So we don't have to die so much. We don't have to go here so often, both in terms of us dying on our own, but us knowing people that die that bring us to these spaces. So as you come through the 20th century, you've got heart transplants, we've got organ transplants of other varieties, we've got face transplants, we're engineering our own genes, we're mapping our human genome. We are test tube babies, in vitro fertilization, very normal, right? That first test tube baby was born in the early 70s, right? So look how fast that medicine has changed our lives. We live longer and longer and longer. So we don't want to talk about death. It's unpleasant. It doesn't happen. It doesn't have to happen. There were two things that I heard on the radio today. And one of them was that they've created an artificial womb. Did you hear this one today? Right, so the science is going to get to, the theory is that if a baby is born tremendously premature, we're just going to put him in this new special womb and that will take care of everything and they'll be able to grow and be taken care of. Nobody has to die. They say that the person that's going to live to be 150 years old has already been born. Think about what that means to middle age and retirement. Start planning your 401s now. Middle age is now 75 or 80. It's moving, the science is moving so fast that you get sick, no problem, we fix you. It's okay. You need more organs, no problem. I'll give you mine, but pretty soon we're going to grow our own, and you're going to 3D print them. Fast, really, really fast. We cheat mortality on a daily basis. We don't go here. We hate going here. It's taboo. It's a subject we don't want. So for a long time, these spaces didn't tell me anything about who we were as a society. Well, what's happened in the last 20 years, 30 years or so, we've decided that we want to say who we are. So we put some personality back in on our stones. In the next couple of slides, you're going to see local stuff that I took pictures of. I did not do it. I'm doing it to illustrate exactly the same way I used the Victorians and the Colonials, those pictures from your graveyards, to illustrate. So in the next slide or two, you might see somebody you know. It's happened, and honest to God, the first time it happened, it not only did it freak out the lady in the audience whose husband I put up, but it pretty surprising to me. So know that I'm not trying to pick anybody out. I'm not trying to single anybody out as having a good gravestone or a not good gravestone. I'm just showing what we're doing to our gravestones now to talk about who we were and what we want to say about ourselves. We want to say who we were. So now I got faces. I can come in and I can see somebody. I can see who they were that I existed at the same time with, but never had a chance to meet. So we do it a couple of different ways. These are etchings, this one and this one. They're etchings. They're either done with lasers or they're done by incredibly talented people with immense eternal patience to etch it into the stone. These are called photoceramics because they're photos applied to a piece of ceramic and then sealed and put on the stone. So I can see individuals, and I got to tell you, my first magician ever. So cool. They are also not just what we looked like as people, but who we were, what our professions were, how we identified ourselves. Fire, police. Clearly, this is an Italian. No. Okay. Can you tell I was out there in March? So not only do I have a great big old shamrock attached to the face of the stone, can you see the Celtic cross down there? Yeah. I might be Irish. I'm just guessing. We also want to say what we enjoyed. Yeah, I got to say there's all the family names on the stone, but the only image is that handsome guy right there. So, pets are like kids, right? Just as important. We enjoyed being out on the boat. We enjoyed the water. And to me, that looks like it's actually moving pretty fast. So we enjoyed the outdoors. We enjoyed the water. We enjoyed the sailing. We enjoyed our home. Now, maybe this is a home, my own home. Maybe this is my vacation home. It looks like English countryside or Irish countryside. Yeah, doesn't it? So, maybe this is where they're from. Maybe this is where they traveled to and loved it so much that I want to go home. I've seen people put their homes on their tombstones, and I actually saw ones that had an address. Yeah, you better believe I went and checked it out just to see if they matched up. We got sports fans. We want to say what we enjoyed as well. Technology in the cemetery. I know this is going to strike us as Northerners, it strikes us as completely insane, but here we go. Video. So it's a 7-inch square box, and what we're looking at is, this is the door. So what you're looking at is it's open. This door would close on the unit. It's solar powered. It runs 3 days on a full charge. I'm not making this stuff up. When you close the door, it's waterproof. And it runs an hour of still video. Really? Still video? Huh. Kind of archaic, no? You guys recognize this thing here? It's called a QR code. QR means quick response. It's the same thing as the UPC barcodes that we're used to seeing. This is just a different variety. It's really for those of us too lazy to type in www.gravestonegirls.com. Watch me. So it's made by the Memory Medallion Company in Pennsylvania. They hold the U.S. patent for using QR technology for memorialization. So you buy this little device, this little thing. It's not even really a device. It's just a little metal medallion. This is about the actual size. It's about 1 inch in diameter. This is the part where I invite you to play along. Should you have a QR reader on your phone, you download an app to your phone to read QR. for, I don't know, I see it on my ketchup bottles, I see it everywhere, it's on all sorts of maps and all sorts of objects. It's trying to drive web traffic to that particular product. Well, in this case, you've got this object on the gravestone. You come in with your smartphone and your QR reader loaded onto your smartphone, and you pray to the technology gods that it works, and it does, and it brings you to this person's website. Pretty cool, huh? 999 spaces for you to do anything you want. You can post your writings, you can post your pictures, you can do anything you want. Genealogists, you can post your lineage, all your research, because where do you go to look for information about a family? You go to the cemetery, right? So this is Miss Sarah Buchanan. She is the spokesmodel that's connected to Memory Medallion's QR code here. She decided she wanted to say something very special about herself. She held the notoriety in this life for making the secret family fudge recipe. So apparently she wanted to retain this title in death. So when you scan this QR code and are taken to her website, amongst other things, you will find a 16-minute video of this old lady bossing her adult son around the kitchen while she teaches us how to make the secret family fudge recipe. I told you I can't make this stuff up. So I know that it seems crazy. We're like, sacred ground, I don't know, this is might be bad mojo here. But the technology companies, both this one and this one, this is actually really passé technology, this is second generation. They're banking on the idea that we know what this stuff is, that we use QR codes, we see them in our regular everyday dealings, and that we want to say something about ourselves, who we were and what we enjoyed. It's a way to continue on, at least past your own dad. I will tell you that I have not seen these in New England. I think this is still too far out for us. We're still 400-year-old Puritans. This might be a little much for us. There's a few others we met along the way here in Lancaster that I wanted to make sure you knew about. These guys here, these are over in St. John's. You've got some over in starts with E. Thank you. I keep wanting to say Edgewood. So these are called white bronze. They're made by the Monumental Bronze Company in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They were made from the last quarter of the 1800s into about the 19-teens. And they are neither white nor are they bronze. They're kind of this pale blue. You can easily spot them on the landscape. When you do see them, park the car, get out, take a walk. Go over and knock on it. It's going to return a metallic, hollow sound. It's made of metal. It's not made of bronze. It's made out of 99% pure zinc that is smelted at the foundry, poured into molds to make the individual pieces. The pieces are then shipped to the site where they are then assembled with more molten zinc to put the pieces together. So these designs, these monuments were sold through design books. They didn't have stores. They had traveling salesmen. You could go through the design book and you could pick everything you wanted. You could customize your monument. Monumental Bronze Company was making bronze during the heyday of it, and in the cemetery, it was things like doors, vases, or vases, I guess, because they were expensive, plaques and statuary, and bronze had a very high cachet. People were like, "Ooh, you have money if you've got bronze and you're using it in the cemetery." So what Monumental Bronze Company was doing is they were really looking for that second-tier customer, because bronze was expensive. So they capitalized on the recognition of the name bronze and spun it by calling this zinc marker white bronze. The promise that unlike bronze, when you put bronze outside, it oxidizes and it goes from being that really beautiful color to being a very not pretty thing very quickly. It oxidizes, it turns black and green and it runs and it's streaky. This is never going to change color. This is always going to look this good. And you can have a newfangled modern grave marker for, yes, you needed to have some money, but a little less money than having than you would have to pay for something that was made out of bronze. Read your gravestones. Remember this guy? Well, what the gravestone says is that on the day he was born, June 17th, 1738, it looks like, and died the day of his birth. Childhood mortality, very high. Mortality, very high in the 18th century. This is another white bronze. I wanted to make sure that I tell you this. The white bronze stopped being manufactured. They sort of fell out around the time of World War I. And it was thought to be, the most reason was that the foundries and the material were required for the war effort in the 19-teens rather than for making monuments. But we do see them dated past the 19-teens. Drowned, killed by a tree, because you know those trees are mean, they'll just jump right out and get you. So things are happening to people, and we've got a little illusion here. And one of the things that if you're interested, you can run with this. This was probably written about. So the great part, go ask Mr. Google. Go Google this name and this date and see what you find. The great thing is there's so many collections being digitized and for preservation, but also as a way of disseminating, giving easy access to information. You might find out what happened to him. Killed by a tree. Well, chances are pretty good that he was cutting a tree down on his property and he just miscalculated. These are the kind of things that would have made the papers, so you can read about them and learn a little something else. This is your first clue to get you started. I've told you to look at the art, look at the stone, type of material, look at the symbols, read the words, read all the words up here. Don't forget to look down. One more thing to remember. So at the bottom of this stone, right down here, is a signature. And that's the Park family that I told you about. They were from the Groton area, I believe, and they worked for 3 generations. You'll also find markings at the bottom of the stone. This sometimes is pricing, sometimes it's practice. This stuff was originally meant to be below grade. And over time they heave and hoe and change. And this stuff then suddenly comes to light over time. And if you look down, sometimes you see something really cool. At the base of the gravestone for Josiah Whitcomb was this little stone with his name on it and 7th great grandson. So somebody has come to visit, somebody's done their genealogy, not 7th great grandson, that this is the 7th great grandfather of whoever left this stone. So somebody's come to visit, somebody's marking their family line, somebody's marking their genealogy. I thought that was pretty cool. I don't see that very often. I see people leave mementos, but I rarely have I seen them leave such a blatant genealogical reference. I want to make sure you know about the Association for Gravestone Studies. Headquartered in Greenfield, but that's just the offices. We have members all over the country, and we have international members as well. They are the Educational Clearinghouse. I mentioned them earlier about how to get information about doing gravestone rubbing. They've got all sorts of information about rubbing, cleaning, preservation work, how to read worn gravestones. They're really the ones that taught me how to use that mirror to light the faces of the stones. They've been around for about 40 years. You can sign up for the monthly e-newsletter through the website. You don't have to be a member. And if you become a member, you get quarterly publications and a bunch of other neat goodies. I think the and the content of both the e-newsletter and the quarterly publications is it's all driven by member content. So there's always somebody out there writing about a preservation project, a documentation project. I found these symbols, I don't know what it means. I went on vacation in Romania, and here's what Romanian cemeteries look like, and everything in between. It's a great way to learn. It's a really great organization. My favorite thing is that we go to cemetery camp every year. The adults call it going to the annual conference. But the kids, the bad kids with the sunglasses on at the back of the bus at 7 in the morning, we call it going to cemetery camp. So know about them, use them as a resource. My job has been this evening to tell you that cemeteries are fun, interesting, educational places. You have such fabulous history here in town. You really need to take advantage of it. We'll do two things. One, make sure you get your propaganda. This is how you find the Gravestone Girls again. You can download this from the girls' website, and you can also download a 4-page handout about symbols and their commonly accepted meanings. And print that out for yourself, put it in your cemetery kit. Anybody that's on Facebook, I expect my numbers to be up tomorrow if they're not already. I'll take questions. We've got a few minutes. I'll take questions in an open forum if you want. If not, please, thank you so much for coming. Help these spaces, help these ladies. They're very dedicated. Your cemeteries and your town needs you. So thank you so much.